Welcome to the Lensrentals podcast. I'm Ryan Hill. This week, I'm talking with Lensrentals product development supervisor Ali Aycock Patterson and Lens Pro To Go video producer Dom Boisvert about the new RED Komodo. Now, I know this camera has been out for a while, but for us at Lensrentals, new is a relative term. There are plenty of other sources out there for day one impressions of new gear, so we prefer to withhold our opinion until we've had some time to see how our customers use something and whether it can stand up to a few months of constant work. And it really has been a few months of constant work. As RED's smallest and most affordable camera to date, the Komodo has been flying off of our shelves. But is all the hype around this camera really worth it? And what do you need if you're working with a RED for the first time? I caught up with Ali and Dom to find out. Ali, Dom, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's been a while since we've done this. This is good. I'm excited.
Me too.
So today we're talking, I think we're going to call this episode Komodo 101. So the idea is to kind of introduce people to the RED Komodo, let them know what they think. So you're our professors here. You have some experience with this camera. Since this will likely be many users' first experience with the RED ecosystem, I think a lot of people that are like shooting with the Komodo, it's their first RED camera they've used. I want to start with what you think people should know about working with RED cameras in general, not just the Komodo specifically. And I guess I'll start with Ali. What do you think people should know about RED?
Should this be one of those like good cop, bad cop kind of things? Or
I guess since you're going first, you get to choose which cop you are.
So RED as a whole, as a system, I actually kind of cut my teeth in the industry on a RED one. So I don't have really anything bad to say about RED. For what they are great. Most people, I think, who have not worked with RED fear that the workflow, especially some of the post-production stuff, is going to be super complicated because they use terminology that you don't hear with other camera manufacturer lines, whatever. But I really think once you put your hands on it, RED tends to have some of the easier systems to work with of any comparable camera line.
And Dom, what have you learned about RED in your experience? What do you think people should know?
So I don't have a ton of experience on the RED one. My introduction was definitely with a Raven and the Scarlet. And literally, just like you said, Ali, I had been on plenty of sets and shoots where RED cameras were being used, although I wasn't the operator. And I just kind of was like, oh man, what's this big scary RED workflow going to be like when I eventually shoot on that? And then I finally did it and I was like, oh my God, this is so much easier than I thought. And I looked at like RED code and RED raw and these crazy file formats that just looked like Greek. And I'm like, man, that's going to be scary. And it's so the opposite. It really
is.
They figured out the pipeline. Like when I was in film school, the image pipeline workflow, like the RED pipeline is like really great, really smooth and seamless. And that's been my experience with all RED cameras so far. If you were a complete beginner, I'm almost certain you could figure out a RED DSMC II camera.
Yeah. They're very like, it's much easier to just kind of pick up and use than say, I don't know, like comparable like ARRI cameras or, anything else in that class, especially just the like shot to shot changing like frame rate and ISO and shutter speed. All that is really like easy to get to in the menus.
Here's another thing. If you're I'm 26, I'm part of the digital.
Unacceptable.
Yeah, I know. I was practically born with a cell phone in my hand. I bring that up because having everything be touchscreen accessible is really, really amazing. I feel like, I don't know why I prefaced it with that, but I feel like I was more easily able to figure out the RED just because of that like 99% touch screen interface. You can just do everything from the screen.
So you like it because it feels like a smartphone.
Like a big
just to be clear here.
Oh,
yeah.
I mean, I get that. They were like,
they made a smartphone.
Oh my God, that tanked.
Oh yeah. That's a whole different episode.
Oh my goodness.
We thought about buying that thing. We didn't do it. Thank goodness.
Yes, thank
goodness.
goodness.
So, how much experience, or like what sort of experience, do each of you have with the Komodo in particular? What sort of shooting did you do, Dom, and what sort of testing have you done, Allie? I guess we'll start with Dom. Our de facto good cop, I guess we've decided that
I
Dom is the good
guess.
cop.
Yes.
Young cop.
Yeah. Yeah,
Small
right.
cop.
Yeah. And you said we were like professors. If I was a professor, I'd be like that terrified adjunct professor who, you're practically older than, but he's just your professor for some reason. He looks like a baby.
The guy who actually has to teach the class when Indiana Jones is like gone doing his stuff for 8 months at a time.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's me if we're professors about this. Yeah. So I'll say this first. I didn't have the RED for long. I really only had it for about a week. And so I said, if I have this thing, I'm going to take it on a real like Komodo shoot. Where when the Komodos were first coming out, people were taking them into the woods and into the Siberian tundra, or who's their spokesperson? The mountain.
Oh, are you talking about Jason Momoa?
Yes, Jason Momoa. So he was like the Komodo spokesperson, and then he was going into all these crazy locations and hard to access. I feel like it was on location stuff they were really trying to push for the Komodo. And I said, yeah, I think that's going to be like the ideal type of thing. So I tried to do like a quintessential mountain bike edit. So I got my friend who I mountain bike with regularly, and we just went out into this mountain bike sort of trail system, and I got it on a gimbal. I got it on a DJI RS II with a focus motor connected, which I thought was still pretty bare bones, like Komodo setup, but still built up to how I would think someone would normally be using it. So super lightweight. Like I biked to that location just holding the camera on the gimbal with one arm and driving with one arm. Yeah, it was mainly I wasn't like plummeting down a mountain bike hill. It was all like super flat. And my friend told me that. It's like, yeah, you could probably really, really easily ride over to this little spot. So that's a testament to how lightweight and shootable it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I took it out to do like what I think is like a quintessential mountain bike shoot, because I've been watching a lot of these mountain bike edits, and they do a lot of the same shots, and there's a lot of themes across these mountain bike edits that I've been watching. And I said, oh, great, I have the Komodo for a week. I'm going to try and sort of replicate something like that. And I feel like it was perfect for that. I mean, I already told you, I one-handedly drove it out into the woods with like absolutely no problem. And I even tried, this is, I assume, like what way more experienced mountain bike / cinematographer people do, but I even tried like riding with it and like getting a riding shot and holding it sort of in front of me and just going like at a slow pace to sort of like tracking side by side with my friend. And that was extremely hard, but that was not a shortfall of the camera. That was me trying to do something I've never done before. It was very challenging. Probably a 2 operator type shot I was going for with a single person on a bike. But to answer your question, yeah, I took it out for like a mountain bike shoot, and I thought it was absolutely perfect for that.
And we should mention that, so that was for the Lens Pro to Go YouTube page. So that footage you got, we'll link to. You can watch that if you're listening to this and you're interested.
Yes, that will come out later this week, although by the time you're hearing this podcast, it'll be uploaded for a while.
And Allie, you did a lot of our like onboarding and product testing kind of internally, so a little bit more like controlled stuff in the office. What has your experience been?
I definitely did not go mountain biking or kayaking or anything else. There's no mountains in Memphis. We do have a lot of rivers though. But we received our first Komodo, one of the stormtroopers, and it was just an itsy bitsy little beta camera. And it was, I wasn't super excited about it because you've got all this influencer marketing nonsense. And then you get this camera and it's like, well, as a rental product, you really need it to be reliable and stable. And you don't want the features to be hypothetical or eventual. You want them to be here. And, RED has always kind of set this precedent of they're battle tested. And while it is a well-built camera and definitely, like kind of a rough and tumble kind of guy, perfect for something like mountain biking, it was just like every time someone would ask a question about it, does it do this? Does it do that? It's like, yes, but with this caveat, or it's supposed to do it eventually. And so when it first came out, it was very much a matter of why would you run the risk of using this product that's basically still beta? But with every firmware update they've released, with every change log, it's become more and more of why wouldn't you use this product? Because they have truly just packed as many professional features as you could ever ask for, a tiny little box camera. And it just blows any comparable camera like Zcam E2, S6, or I don't even really think the Panasonic BGH1 is comparable, but you really do feel the RED feature set inside of this very compact camera and without a lot of the required modularity of the DSMC II line or the DSMC line before that. And so while I wasn't crazy about it from go, I've certainly come around to it for sure.
To get into like your personal pros and cons from your experience with it, what were your favorite parts about working with the camera and what are your least favorite parts about working with the camera?
This isn't really my personal way of shooting. I use a lot of manual focus lenses. And so the fact that the autofocus support is maybe still barely in existence. The fact that, it didn't support RF lenses with a native RF mount, you needed an adapter. And even then support for focus and other features were pretty touch and go. Now, if you're just shooting with manual focus lenses, at the time, there weren't really any RF mounted cinema lenses. So in the beginning, I would say one of the biggest, I guess, cons of it was just lens availability, just the ability to complete it as a system and build it out. There weren't a lot of available accessories. There weren't cage systems yet. All of that was very slow, probably because RED was very slow to actually release the production version of this camera. And so that was, really, it wasn't so much the way I was shooting. I probably wouldn't have used a camera that was in such an early stage for any project that I, at least in being professionally, paid to work on. But I do feel like a lot of our customers got it and were like, ugh, why doesn't it do this yet? And I understood that. But again, a lot of that has been addressed. And I'm sure moving forward, they will have even more things that make you go, wow, this camera is 2 pounds and does a whole lot of cool shit.
What is there on the pro side? What were the upsides of working with the Komodo?
We go in bad cop or good cop.
Whatever cop you feel like being.
It has a built-in LCD. I never thought RED would do something so traditional and obvious and easy. Also, the fact that it chooses to CFast is pretty remarkable. No need for expensive proprietary media. They have been aggressively working with third-party manufacturers for memory card compatibility, battery compatibility, again, lens compatibility. Less of a thing, but we're getting there. So,
Yeah, I am curious about the CFast thing. Do you think that's going to, well, I guess, none of us know, but if you had to guess, if you were forced to guess by a podcast host, do you think that is...
Hate when that happens.
Do you think that is going to bleed over into the rest of their line at all? Or are they going to stick with only CFast for this and maybe any more consumer facing cameras and remain with like the RED mags for their more professional stuff?
I think it really all depends on whether or not other types of media like CF Express, whether or not those can kind of become more of a staple. Right now, we are getting past a lot of the early issues that people are having with them, but I don't think RED would step out of something that they know works and take a chance on something that may or may not be as reliable.
Yeah, I think I agree that I would be surprised if they go with more broadly available non-proprietary media, if only because part of their like branding and ethos has always been to kind of push technology forward. Like they've always been like, okay, we're the first to 8K, we're the first to relatively easy RAW, we're the first to compressed RAW, and to like continue to make those technological advances. I'm sure they want to ensure that they have control over, the speed of their media. They wouldn't want that to be a bottleneck, I guess is what I'm saying. CFast to be, like a limiting factor in future technology, I would assume.
I would like to think so. I do think the CFast decision, also the whole concept of leveraging the RF mount, I think largely those decisions were made due to an interest in keeping the price point in a certain place.
Yeah, absolutely. What were your like personal pros and cons from your experience, Dom?
All right, pros. It's probably one of the best gimbal cameras I've ever used. It's literally a 4-inch cube, so you are not going to have any clearance issues with the body. You're not going to have any clearance issues whatsoever. Obviously, you get an adapter on there and an even longish lens. Then you're playing with the tilt axis clearance problem. I used it with the RF 15 to 35 with the DJI RS II, like I said, and it was like a dream. Operating that was incredible with the focus wheel just accessible right there. The only thing is if I was just relying on that top LCD, that obviously like would have been a little bit hard. I did have a Ninja sort of attached to the grip of the Ronin, so I was getting some monitoring there, but it was just so great. Monitoring from the Ninja down there, focusing with the focus wheel, and then if I needed to make any changes, just touch on the top of the LCD, made all my changes super quick. Communication out there, this is on my like mountain bike shoot, wasn't like great. It was basically just us yelling at each other from far distances in the woods. So it was like, "You ready to shoot?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And a lot of the times, maybe I wasn't. And I just make a quick settings thing, good to go. That also reminds me of the pre-roll, which I think is a really excellent choice for this. And correct me if I'm mistaken, but the first RED camera to do a sort of cache recording or pre-roll.
I think the Ranger will do it, if not the other DSMC II ones.
That would make sense for the Ranger. Anyways, that makes a lot of sense for the type of shooting that I think people will be doing with the Komodo, namely like gimbal stuff. But also if you're just in the sort of thick of like an action-y scenario like I was, and you just always want to keep that going in case we had a communication error out there. Like I said, happened every so often.
Yeah.
And then I'm rolling an extra second or two or up to 4 seconds or so in some of these higher resolutions. And that could be a lifesaver.
Can you explain how that works just for anybody who's like unfamiliar?
Sure. So in other systems, sometimes this is called cache recording. Like on the FS5 and FS7, it's called cache recording, not CASH, but CACHE. If you know anything about computer science, that's really just a name for like hidden data. It's literally French for hidden, cache.
Mm-hmm.
So what it'll do is it's technically, and this is kind of mind blowing, it's technically always recording to the card. And so when you actually hit record, it will record a couple of seconds before when you hit record. So it's basically traveling in time. No, it's just always a little bit recording so that when you actually record, it records a couple of seconds before you do that.
Yeah. Very helpful for action stuff because, you know, I think we've all been in a situation where we've been like, ooh, I started hitting record just as I saw something interesting happening, but I wish I had a little bit more in the front end of the take I just took.
Yeah. And so in Red Raw, in higher resolutions, say like Red Raw 6K, that only buys you like a second or two. But, you know, that's an eternity if you needed that extra second, that, you know. So that was really, really cool. So yeah, okay, perfect gimbal camera, cache recording is really, really cool. There are plenty of other things I like about it. Like quickly, I'll just say that, just like you said earlier, Ali, you get the red image that you're used to out of the Komodo. There's like hardly any compromises to the red look that you were used to on previous Reds. And that just right there, once you take a look at your first clip that you took on Red Komodo, you're like, oh yeah. Exactly. I didn't sacrifice anything by going to this small body, unless you really wanted to split hairs with the various different compression modes that you would get on the DSMC IIs. So I'll actually before I crap on this thing, I'll quickly talk about that. I'm just not gonna crap on it. Yeah, so you get for those Red Raw files, you get high, medium, and low quality compression modes. So in RED cameras before, you got all these different compression ratios that went all the way up to like 32:1. And if you're not familiar with sort of how that works, it's that would basically mean that I don't even think I want to speak to this because I don't know if I can actually articulate it correctly.
I can give it a shot, at least like based on what I've read from like RED's manuals. On a RED camera, you're shooting raw all the time, unless you really go in and like set your proxies to like not record normal footage. Like you have to take very specific extra steps to not record raw. What you're recording is compressed raw. The compression ratio, which is very confusing to a lot of people, is
Right.
the degree to which your camera is compressing that file. And like you said, it's always expressed in that sort of formula, 10:1, 8:1, 15:1. It's the degree to which that is being compressed. So a 10:1 compression is 10 times smaller, or 1/10 the size of an uncompressed raw file. The actual information behind that compression is proprietary. So I don't know, for instance, like what specifically sets apart a 10:1 compressed raw file versus a 8:1 compressed raw file beyond the fact that you're getting more data. I don't know like
Sure.
what data is being cut away there, but they do have like recommendations for which settings to use depending on what you're shooting. And they recommend 8:1 or above, I believe, for like theatrical exhibition.
And they ditched all that and they went with just high, medium, and low compression modes, which I think is really great. It's a simplified RED camera, and so I think it makes sense that your RED RAW formats are also simplified.
I totally agree. I honestly, like, maybe a working professional director of photography or like a DIT would disagree, but if I had the choice, I would go 3 settings versus 20 settings any day.
Yeah, seriously. Maybe a DIT would like to know very specifically what sort of bit rates and levels of compression that are in each one of those, just so they are informed like that. But for me, the shooter, it's like, do I want this to take up a ton of card space, a little bit of card space, or be okay on card space? That's like practically how I look at it.
All right, we'll take a quick break right there, and we'll be right back with more about the RED Komodo.
Want a discount on your next order from Lensrentals? Head to lensrentals.com/podcast or follow the link in the show notes for a coupon code. As the largest online photo and video equipment rental house in the world, Lensrentals has been supplying both professionals and hobbyists for over 15 years. We carry everything from cameras and lenses to drones, computers, even VR headsets, all shipped straight to your door for whatever length of time you need. Rent the gear you need to get the shot and grab a discount at lensrentals.com/podcast. That's lensrentals.com/podcast.
Welcome back to the Lensrentals podcast. Before the break, we covered RED RAW compression rates a little bit, and now we're going to talk about some possible cons of working with the Komodo.
Okay, so yeah, I had to mention the compression ratios because that was one big standout thing for the Komodo. But here's a downside. When I think of a RED camera, and this is what got me the most excited about RED cameras when I had first shot on them, is you get high resolutions and high frame rates. And like, that's what I thought of a RED. Like there were seldom cameras out there. This is back a couple of years ago. More cameras can do this now, but there were very seldom cameras out there that could do 4K 120 FPS. As an action sports person who takes a lot of action sports stuff, that's the dream recording setting. The dream. It's just as slow as you want it, perfectly crisp 4K, no sacrificing resolution to get super slow like I used to do on a GH5 and Sony. And so when I was originally shooting on Reds, I said, man, that is the best. Super slow frame rates. Then I get the Komodo and I'm thinking, surely this will at least do 4K 120. We just got the EOS R5 and the Sony A7S III, each with 4K 120 this year. So the Komodo, you can only do 120 FPS in 2K, and
at this time.
Oh, so is that Is that coming?
I mean, the fact that they just introduced 6K anamorphic modes, which is really not a simple feat. You have to
No.
really look into a lot of the
Yeah.
way the sensor is performing and how each part of the sensor is performing. And so I feel like there's a lot of action left in that sensor, and I wouldn't rule out the possibility of that being available somewhere in the future. I mean, so far this camera has been like a genie in a lamp. You ask for it, and eventually
Yeah.
you seem to kind of get it somehow.
Right. And you're so right about that. I shouldn't have counted it out. Like it can't happen. I'm obviously this camera is still, they're still taking feedback and they're still making changes to it via firmware upgrade.
Yeah, I'm getting on their forum when we're done here and telling them they need 4K 120 and voice activated recording.
Oh God, have fun on that forum.
Oh, voice activated. You know, that is,
I just blew Dom's mind.
That's an excellent idea. I would have loved to have just yelled at the Komodo on that shoot day to record, as if just tapping the top LCD wasn't easy enough. But
Dear Jared, why isn't your Komodo more like a Hero 9?
Yeah, right.
Well, I think that 4K 120 thing is at least partially, or the lack of 4K 120 is at least partially due to something we haven't hit yet, which is that the camera has a global shutter, which surprised me. Do you think the global shutter is like worth it for, I'm assuming that's a limitation on frame rate.
First of all, I'd like to add that to my pluses for the camera. I actually completely forgot about that. Which is just massive. And of course, also, I'm just going to keep bringing everything back to action sports shooting. But when I do a whip pan at 15 millimeters, trying to like track someone and in a slower frame rate, then you get some pretty terrible warping. On other cameras, it's absolutely non-existent on the Komodo. I've done rolling shutter tests, and it is truly remarkable.
Yeah, I guess for that style of shooting, it's pretty important. Although I don't know, I don't shoot a lot of action sports myself, but I've never thought of the other RED cameras, the ones with rolling shutters, as having much of a problem with like shutter artifacts.
No, so they don't. So Reds that I've used in the past are readout machines. And so they don't have a lot of those artifacts that you get with slower readout systems. And so if you're comparing this to Reds in the past, old Reds will still look really, really great. But if you are comparing this to a camera that has had some bad rolling shutter, I think the GH5, that's pretty well discussed, right? That the rolling shutter on the GH5.
Yeah, the GH5 for sure. The A7S too. I remember having a really bad rolling shutter.
Yes. Yeah. I encourage any listeners of this, if you for somehow have a Komodo and an A7S II by your hands, do a rolling shutter test. You'll see why global shutter is important.
Yeah, and we've gone into that difference. I don't think we have time in this episode to like explain global shutter versus rolling shutter for anybody who's listening that isn't familiar, but we've written blog after blog. We'll link to that stuff in the show notes too, in case you're curious about that difference. And
to bring it back to the point that that this is why we started talking about global shutter. I even wrote that in my script for my Komodo video. I said the 4K 120, the lack of 4K 120 might be a readout thing, and since they gave this sensor global shutter with an ultra fast readout, that might be one of the things they had to ex-nay.
And Ali, you mentioned the anamorphic modes, and that was part of a recent firmware update that came out after Dom did his YouTube test. So you've actually been able to test some features on this camera that Dom didn't have a chance to see. What did that new firmware update add?
It fixed a whole bunch of things. If anyone listening to this has experienced some kind of wonky, weird stuff with camera freezing or color shifting on the LCD or stuff like that, all of that is supposed to have been addressed. Of course, it's hard to know for sure because you have to have something that's not working properly to be able to confirm it. But the 6K anamorphic modes, specific to 6K, they do not have anamorphic modes yet in lower resolutions. But you have an option of 2x, 1.8x, 1.6, 1.5, I think down to 1.3x, all in 6K. They added 4-channel audio support. So you've got 2 channels from your internal mic. You've got 2 channels from an external mic. You can link them, you can unlink them if you need to adjust each one's gain level or something like that. A lot of the things, and this is actually something I was originally pretty into with the Komodo that they always just kind of got right. And that was its ability to have some kind of wireless control and monitoring. So with the Komodo rather, RED introduced a new communication protocol. They also included a dual band Wi-Fi chip inside of the camera, along with a few other hardware requirements to ensure that streaming and wireless control would be possible. And for those of you who aren't real familiar with past RED camera models, a lot of them could eventually do these kinds of things, but it might take anywhere from 5 to 30 minutes just to build out your rig. So it is impressive that it's as simple as just navigating the menus on the Komodo. Everything is just already there. You can do, the live view. You can actually change your focus point, like on your lenses wirelessly, which is pretty cool. Originally, it would only do that with the Global Dynamics lenses. I think they've added it to a few Canon lenses, but I'm not entirely sure on that one. With this update, they also added tools to the live view, so it's no longer just a clean live streaming image. You can also get false color peaking, log view, zebra overlays. And if you don't have a computer, you can control it and monitor it straight from your phone.
So let's move on to accessories. Like you both mentioned, the Komodo is a lot more usable out of the box than a lot of other RED cameras. RED stuff tends to be very modular, where the brain is like just that. It would be like taking your brain out of your body. It's not really usable without a bunch of other stuff attached to it. But the Komodo, has a built-in LCD and has its own inputs and outputs, but it's still not entirely self-contained. So I'm curious what accessories you used on your shoots or, testing in-house, and which you think are kind of non-negotiable for like a shooting situation.
Yeah. Let's see. I used it pretty bare bones, actually. I didn't have a lot of the accessories for it readily at my hands when I was going to take it out. So I didn't use the expander module because I didn't need it for anything I was doing on the gimbal.
And the expander module, that's just time code, gen lock, and external control. Is that right?
Yeah. It's exactly, time code, gen lock, and then it's a 4-pin for external control, which I'm pretty sure is new to the Komodo. Well, first, I need to know this for myself. Do any DSMC II accessories work on the Komodo?
I don't believe so, no. At least
Obviously,
not anything that requires electronic communication. Maybe some of the
Yeah.
hardware handles that would just like go into a 3/8 or something would probably be fine. But
so nothing obviously that attaches to the body. I don't think any of the LCDs work. The top handle and side handle definitely wouldn't work.
No. I mean, you could,
I think
unless
it's
it can screw into a traditional 1/4 or 3/8 16 hole, because it has a few of those, but beyond that, you're not going to see any cross compatibility.
Yeah, which I believe we have a warning about on our product page, but just to reiterate it here, like if you're renting a Komodo and need a monitor, do not rent like a RED monitor that you would use on any other DSMC II camera. And you did mention a monitor, Dom, right? You used a Ninja?
Yeah, I did use a Ninja, although and I used it with the Ronin RS II, and I didn't use it with any Komodo accessories.
Okay. So yeah, you just had like a Ninja on the RS II.
Yeah, with the focus motor attached, but those are all RS II accessories.
Okay.
Yeah, I used it actually from the RED standpoint, from the RED ecosystem. I used it actually really bare bones.
The Ninja, that was just for monitoring. You didn't do any like proxy recording or anything in that?
Nope, didn't record out to the Ninja. I just wanted a nice, bright, crisp image because I was shooting in the direct sunlight.
And did you run SDI or HDMI? I forget.
There's no HDMI.
There's no HDMI out?
They only put the things that you need on there.
I like that. Yeah.
Fuck your HDMI.
Yeah, they only put serious video connections on the Komodo.
Like B and
that's
C.
really fantastic. I was worried you were going to tell me there was no SDI.
No, it's only SDI. Full size
okay.
SDI at that.
Beautiful.
And like, I wouldn't have been terribly surprised at that. A lot of cameras are just HDMI only, and that generates an enormous sigh from me most of the time.
And Allie, you have had a little bit more experience with our like accessory ecosystem because you've done a lot of this in-house testing. What would you, I guess, starting with monitors, what would you recommend monitor-wise?
So we just recently added the ND 7-inch and the SmallHD ND 7-inch and the Focus Pro OLED. We just added Komodo camera control to a few of our copies. It's now a separate product from the original monitor. So if you're listening to this, not every monitor has it. Only the ones that specify Komodo camera control will have it. But the process is really easy. You basically just plug it in and scroll over to the last page on the monitor and say Komodo camera control. It'll ask you, do you want to connect it? And one thing that I really like about the SmallHD monitors with camera control is they'll actually walk you through. They have like built in a guide on how to do this. So if you're, say, in the first step and you haven't progressed to the next one, it'll tell you, did you check the baud rate? Is it this? And then you get to the next step and it says, would you like to connect now? And so that's really nice. The cable, for the Focus Pro, it's a direct connection, LEMO connection style from the camera to the monitor. The cable, I want to say, is roughly 2 feet, so you don't have a whole lot of cable line to work with, but at the same time, it's not really designed for that. Especially with a camera that if you're truly off camera, you can control it through an app. So this is truly for, gimbal use and stuff like that, where you're at close quarters with the camera. The ND 7 requires an adapter to be installed, but once that's attached and it's a really secure connection, you still have that same LEMO style connector. So if you're doing action sports, you're not going to run the risk of things getting loose or coming disconnected or something like that. Then, of course, RED has their whole slew of their own proprietary accessories. We have a production kit that includes the outrigger handle, which sure is great for some shooting styles. It's similar to the DSMC II handle. Not really my style of shooting. I would rather have something like the wing grip, where it's literally just a metal cutout. It's like it turns your little square into a square with handles, which I like. And then there's, of course, the expander module, which we kind of already touched on. And I guess if you're trying to do a camera array or you're trying to bring the Komodo into some kind of like multi-camera environment, that obviously makes a lot of sense. There aren't a lot of unnecessary connectors on the camera, so you would need that expander to satisfy any needs for multi-camera stuff. But I just don't see a lot of people needing that. Another one that probably gets overlooked a lot is the wooden camera, the audio adapter, which is, of course, going to adapt to one of the little expansion ports on the camera itself to give you 2 XLR inputs.
Is the expander module a requirement for control through the monitor, or does that run into a different port on the camera itself?
It runs into a port on the camera itself.
Okay, perfect. So the most important accessory beyond the expander module, lenses. Dom, you mentioned you shot with the RF 15 to 35.
Yes.
Did you use the EF adapter at all, or any other RF lenses, or was it pretty much just that RF 15 to 35?
All RF lenses. I did bring the 85 too, just because I figured out at some point wanted to pop in for some tighter shots, and really only one of those made it into the video and made it into the edit I made. But obviously, I'm a big fan of the RF line of lenses. I was a bit skeptical at first. I saw the size of that 28 to 70, and I said, Canon, you
have lost your mind.
Have lost your mind. And then I used it, and then I took portraits with it. And later, when I was editing those pictures and icing my wrist, I said, wow, those look amazing. So I am a really big fan of RF glass. And when the Komodo was released with an RF mount, I did get genuinely excited. I thought about using it with the 85, but also the zooms are also just truly, really so great. So I shoot on that 15 to 35 a lot on the R6 and R5. And I said, I want a wide range zoom for this shoot. So that's a no brainer. And then that 85 II is a really, really optically impressive piece of glass. And I said, just for diversity, shot diversity in this shoot, I'm going to take that too. And no question, they both looked absolutely amazing, crisp from corner to corner, no aberrations or anything at all. What was really impressive is, we talked about this briefly a little bit, but the lens metadata, you can go onto a certain page of the Komodo and it shows you a whole lot of metadata for your battery, media, all sorts of stuff. The lens metadata is so like articulate, like you can like breathe on the focus ring of the lens and it shows you the change it made. And that includes focus distances too. So I would bet that working with some of those remote focusing systems that you were talking about earlier, if I were to guess, I would bet that those probably work really well with native RF glass.
I guess I'm surprised to hear that. I was under the impression, for whatever reason, that the RF mount was not very like electronically communicative with RF lenses right now. So you were able to like control iris and get like all of that metadata and everything fine?
Yes, you can change iris. I actually don't know if you could switch between autofocus and manual focus. I actually wouldn't have known because my model did not. The autofocus was still in beta, so I was completely manually focusing everything. I guess that would be the missing piece of the puzzle for my opinion about its compatibility with RF lenses, because I wasn't actually able to use the autofocus, which would probably be one of the major things that you would test.
If you prefer to shoot with cinema lenses, especially for those people who've been waiting for these anamorphic modes to be released, Vazen has just announced a 3-lens set of RF cinema lenses that are anamorphic lenses. I think they're 1.8x.
Yes. Are these the first? Is this the new chapter?
Probably. I hope so.
I think these are the first RF cine lenses. When those came up on our new products page here, that was the question I asked. I said, "Wow, it's happening." And then I had to put that in my scripts too. I said, and anamorphic support is coming, although there are very seldom RF anamorphic lenses, and those are the ones I was referring to.
Anything else either of you want to add, either accessory wise or, just about the camera in general? Any other, fun facts that I didn't ask you about?
No, like this has like been something I've been saying about this. If this is your first RED camera, I think you will be really, really impressed. And if you are coming to this from another RED camera, I don't think you will be terribly disappointed.
I completely agree with that statement.
When I was done shooting with it, I didn't want to part with it. I didn't want to take it off the RS II. I was just like, we just had such an excellent day together. And
there was a time that I could not get it out of my life fast enough. Okay. And I've come around to where you're at right now, where it's like, but can't I just keep it at my desk just for a little longer, just to run a few more tests and things? Also, one final thing about this recent firmware update that I didn't mention and should have, because it's certainly worth mentioning, is V-Wave for off-speed audio recordings.
Oh,
that's badass.
Handy. Yeah.
Oh, cool. How off speed are we talking?
I was in the middle of doing that when I realized it was time for me to walk over here.
Oh, gotcha.
But I'm going to assume it's cooler than nothing.
Well, yeah, we'll test it. And if there's any new features between now and release, I can put them in the outro. So listen up for the outro for anything that has come up firmware-wise since recording. Because, yeah, they are introducing a ton of features.
It is worth mentioning, though, that I don't think voice activation is ever going to be an option.
Well, you can yell at a PA, which just add one middleman. Just scream at a PA instead of at your camera, and the PA can hit record on their phone.
Fair enough.
Okay, Komodo, make this project look good.
Yeah, don't learn your PA's name. Call them Komodo.
Yeah, they're just, that's the voice support, is just, now that measly PA is just called Komodo.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you both for coming in. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Ryan.
All right, have a good one. Thanks for listening to the Lensrentals podcast. If you want to try the RED Komodo for yourself, guess what? You can. There will be a link to the product page in the show notes, and we'll even give you a discount if you go to lensrentals.com/podcast. That's lensrentals.com/podcast. As always, if you're enjoying the show, you can support it by subscribing and giving us a review on Apple Podcasts. We're on Instagram and Twitter at Lensrentals, and thanks to Jacques Granger for our theme music. More of his work can be found at revengebodymemphis.bandcamp.com. On the next episode of the Lensrentals podcast, we'll be answering listener questions. You asked us everything from whether a lens will survive a dip in geyser water to how to get smells out of your camera bags, and we will get into it on the next episode of the Lensrentals podcast.